What's going on? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Brian, and in today's video we are going to be looking at the top 3 meta decks so far in Shimmering Skies and seeing if we can make them a little bit more budget conscious. I know if you've been collecting cards since the beginning of Lorcana, it might not be too much of a stretch to have all these in your collection already, but getting started, it could be really daunting looking at a $400, $500, $600 deck list and seeing the top 10s of all these tournaments with decks of similar monetary values, especially now with not too many ways to easily simulate games against real players. Investing that much money into Lorcana just to turn around and change your deck because something wasn't working is no fun. So I've loaded up the top 3 placing decks from one of the latest Lorcana tournaments, and we'll see if we can get it down to maybe $50. We'll see if we can take it down even lower, but I think $50 is a good starting point. In a perfect world, we can get it down to 20, but with so many set 1, set 2 cards being highly meta, those cards just hold more value because they're no longer easily available. But we'll see. We'll see how much we can get it to drop down in price. Now, there are going to be some things, especially with the legendary cards, that we're not going to be able to replicate, which is why they're super expensive legendary cards in Lorcana. But I think the overall theme of these decks should be something we should easily be able to replicate. Before we get started, I just wanted to thank you guys for the continued support. We are just about at 800 subs right now, and once we get to 1,000, I have promised to give away my copy of the D23 collector set that launched with Shimmering Sky. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and check out our giveaway video for a chance to win the set yourself. And for my returning viewers, thank you so much for tuning in again. Let's get right into the video. Alright, so the first deck that we have loaded up here is going to be just the Steel Song deck that just won the 10K CCS tournament. This one's coming in at $623, which is quite expensive. Now the prices have gone up since this set has come out. So if you were to get most of these cards before this type of deck was popular, it definitely wouldn't have cost you $600. But for someone just jumping in, maybe you want to switch to this color set, that is definitely a daunting figure. So with this deck, all you're looking to do is get out a bunch of characters that are going to be able to sing songs mostly higher than their cost. So you're going to be taking advantage of things like the Cinderella Ballroom Sensation. They've got things like the Ariel Spectacular Singer, and then also the Prince Naveen to not only get a card out for free, but after that, you can sing every song in your deck, which makes it a super good card. Now, the other way that you can sing songs before you're supposed to is by shifting, and this deck list runs with the Robin Hood shift line, so playing the 1-cost Robin Hood on turn 1, and then on turn 3, playing the Robin Hood Champion of Sherwood, allowing you to get that turn 3 Whole New World, Long Came Zeus, and really surprise your opponent. Okay, so starting off with the adjustments we're going to make to the deck, I think first thing we have to do is get rid of any of the cards that are going to be over the double-digit threshold. I think that's going to make the most impact on our final deck price. So we're going to have to get rid of the Robin Hood shift line. We'll also need to get rid of Prince Naveen and Rapunzel. And then for songs, we would need to get rid of the Whole New World. And that's going to bring our cost down to 107, which is really good. We've cut $500 off the price. We still do need to replace those cards. But then looking at some of the other expensive cards that have been included here, we've got $20 worth of Strength of the Raging Fire. We've got $26 worth of Ariel Spectacular Singer, and then another $16 for the Cinderella Ballroom Sensation. Bring that up to $20 when you add in things like the Cinderella Stouthearted. Now this deck is pretty aggressive with going for lore, so it's also included 3 copies of the Piglet Pirate Captain. So we might need to get rid of that as well, just because these cards are all bringing the price really high up and making it so we're not able to get to that $50 threshold that we're looking to hit. Getting rid of those characters brought it down to $48.90. I think the only other one that I want to really get rid of probably is going to be just trimming down the Strength of the Raging Fire or the Long Came Zeus. Both of these are really great for removal. I think I might want to get rid of the Long Came Zeus just because it's uninkable. We should be able to replace it. And I think going with a character-focused singing deck, we're going to want to get Strength of the Raging Fire to get as much damage on the board as possible. All right, so now looking to replace those cards, we'll be sticking with Amber and Steel. Let's just make sure we start with the characters here. Okay, so if we're looking to replicate the shifting early and then singing up that the original deck had, we're going to want to look for easy shift lines that have a very low character cost. So from the new set, things like Vanellope here, allowing you to get it out on turn 2 and sing a 4-cost song. They also have like the Fix It Felix, which would be a shift 3, giving you a similar song effect as the Robin Hood, but with this it would have a very different mechanic. But I think what I want to do first is I absolutely want to include copies of the Queen Commanding Presence into this deck. It's one of the cheapest and cost-effective ways to get a 5-cost character out on turn 2. And then another great shift card that is very cheap right now to acquire and very cost-effective ink-wise to get onto the field is going to be the Mulan Reflecting. She's a shift 2, 4-cost character. So on turn 2, she's able to sing those 4-cost songs. She has the added ability of whenever she quests, you can look at the top card of your deck. If it's a song, you can play it for free, which gives us almost like a Prince Naveen type interaction. And if we don't hit that song, the card will just stay on the top of our deck. So now that we have those 2 shift lines in the deck, let's go ahead and put the cheap characters in as well. So we'll go and grab 4 copies of the Queen, and then we'll look at Mulan. Unfortunately for Mulan, in Amber and Steel, we don't have a cheap way to get a Mulan onto the field. But since this Mulan is 4 cost and Prince Naveen was 4 cost, I think I might just play her as is, including 4 copies into it, and we get a similar, although delayed effect that we had with Prince Naveen. So that means we do need to look for probably just one more shift line to include into the deck. And then honestly, if we're just looking to get things out for cheap, we could probably go ahead and play the Pluto Determined Defender. It pairs very well with the 1-cost Pluto that works just like a lantern, but has the added ability of having that shift 5, giving us a strong bodyguard that can heal itself every turn. So let's go ahead, let's try that out. Let's put 4 copies of that in, and then go get the other Pluto and put 4 copies of that in as well. That'll take us to 45 cards and a total of $43, but we still need to replace those songs that we got rid of earlier. Before we do that though, there's one card that is pretty much a 1-to-1 replacement for the Rapunzel that we got rid of earlier. That's going to be Julietta Madrigal. It's a weaker version of the effect, but when you play her, you can remove 2 damage from any character, and then if you do, you get to draw just a single card. So definitely not as good, but giving us a similar effect that the Rapunzel had. All right, and now on to the songs themselves. All right, and then a great card to pair with the Queen that we got earlier is going to be World's Greatest Criminal Mind. This card, when you play it with the Queen, you can actually use the Queen's secondary ability to give your opponent 4 strength for the turn when she quests, which puts most characters over that 5 strength threshold to instantly banish them with World's Greatest Criminal Mind. So that could work out in replacing our Along Came Zeus, as with that combo, we're almost guaranteed to take something off the board in one go. It doesn't hit locations, unfortunately. So I think I will also play just some copies of the Mob song. It is a 10-cost song, but you can sing together with it, and it has a similar effect to like Grab Your Sword, but you can hit locations with it. How it works is once you get a total of 10 singer costs added up together, you can exert them all. You can deal 3 damage to up to 3 target characters or locations. Obviously a lot weaker, but that's why it's only 5 cents on TCG Player. Now, if I really needed a way to remove characters that were ready, the One Last Hope card is a great addition to add in. It's very cheap. The only problem is it relies on you having heroes in your deck, which, looking through our deck list, we only have 1 hero in that Mulan, so we wouldn't be using that secondary effect of the card. But something to look out for if you do have heroes in your deck. Maybe you can spend a little bit more money. That's going to get us up to 56 cards. Still looking at $47 right now, so we're under the $50 threshold. Let's have a peek at some of the items, seeing if we can get some of those abilities that our actions had, or maybe that our characters had. Now, looking at these items, since we're doing a song deck, one thing that we can look to include might be this Ursula's Shell Necklace. Whenever you play a song, you can pay 1 ink to draw a card. Since we're not using ink to play those songs most of the time, we're gonna have ink left over, and this could be a great way to potentially replace even Whole New World, allowing us to dip into that card draw multiple times per turn. I mean, technically, if we played 4 songs in a turn, we could pay 4 ink to draw 4 cards. We're not causing our opponent to discard any of those cards, but this could be an interesting way to keep cards in your hand without paying the $12 a card for the whole new world. And then since we have the Pluto, we can actually get rid of the 3 copies of the Lantern and probably replace that with 3 copies of a song. In this case, we have about $5 to spare. So that gives us a little over $1 per card if we want to stay under that $50 total. And since we got rid of the Lantern, we can keep a similar effect. We can keep a discount effect in the deck by including 3 copies of Zero to Hero. For every character that we have on the field, we're going to pay 1 less to play the next character on this turn. Meaning if we can flood the board with a bunch of characters, we can not only sing a song this turn, but also get something else onto the board for very cheap. Maybe you throw in your Pete at the tail end of a long turn to block your opponents for the next turn. And that'll do it. That gets us to a full 60 card deck for $45.88. I'll go ahead and bring up the image now so we can see what the deck looks like in total. So there you have it. Here is our budget Steel Song coming in under that $50 that we were aiming for. Obviously, it's not going to be as some of those top-end tournament winners. I think you'll still be able to do the general Steel Song idea with this deck, although you will be playing a little bit differently, as you need to play into things like your World's Greatest Criminal Mind, using your Ursula shell to gain additional card draw every turn, while also looking to use like your Pluto and your Zero to Hero to get some of your cards out for cheaper. Maybe you can get that Mulan out for free, and then starting every turn, you can just hopefully get a song. Maybe you hit a mob song with Mulan, and then you get basically a free 10 cost card onto the board. Let me know what you think about this option for a budget version of Steel Song. Now let's move on to Ruby Sapphire, and we'll see what we can do with that deck. All right, we have the Ruby Sapphire finalist deck loaded up here, and just taking a look at it now, it comes in at $365. Runs a total of 61 cards. We can either choose to keep it there or we can bring it down to 60. But looking at the deck, there are a couple copies of cards that are over that double-digit threshold, like your Maui, like your Mufasa. Definitely Maleficent is going to be over that as well. Be Prepared, although I would love to run it in the deck, is over that threshold as well. And then it uses the Tamatoa Lucky Dime combo to close out games, but that might be a little bit too expensive for getting this to be budget conscious. For this deck, let's try and do the same thing, get it down to around $50 and see if we can get a similar feeling deck. This one is going to be revolving around using your early game ramp to get to your control options a lot sooner. So getting to your Be Prepareds, getting to your Mauis and your Madame Medusas, and then closing out the game very quickly in 1 or 2 turns with your Tamatoa Lucky Dime combo. We're gonna get rid of all the copies of the Mufasa, same thing with the Maleficent. We'll have to get rid of Maui as well. And then I'm going to keep Be Prepared in the deck. We might bring down the copies of it just to lower the price, but it's such a good card in Ruby. So to start, I might just bring it down to 2 copies. And then unfortunately, we're going to have to get rid of Lucky Dime. And then same thing with the Fishbone Quill. That brings us down to $89, which brings us way closer to the $50 mark. There still are some things that are rather expensive in this deck. So like the Tamatoa, probably need to get rid of, unfortunately. That'll bring us down to 62. And then as much as I love Be Prepared, the best way to bring down the price very quickly will be just to get rid of it. Now we're sitting at $42.40, and we've got 24 cards to replace, but I think we can find some pretty good replacements for what we took out. All right, so we did take out the Fishbone Quill, which right off the bat, I want to just replace that with the Great Stone Dragon. Typically, we only need to run 3 copies of Great Stone Dragon in decks like this, and instead of paying $9 a card, we're getting a similar effect for 17 cents. Now, we don't have Tamatoa for item retrieving, so we could go ahead and include 3 copies of Merlin's Carpetbag for 7 cents a piece, giving us a similar effect to grab those items from the discard, but we're losing out on a character, which could shift the balance a little negatively. The other item that I wanted to grab for Sapphire, since we don't have Lucky Dime to cash in on a character's lore without questing them, I think instead we want to build up our character's lore as much as possible. And to do that, we're going to use the Medal of Heroes, giving 2 lore to a character on a turn if we banish the item and pay 2 ink. And at 9 cents a card, it'll be easily something we can throw in. All right, and then we need to take a look at the removal options that we have available to us. So if we just search for banish, we should get a list of cards that allow us to banish something when played. So we don't have access to Maleficent Dragon, allowing us to banish any character. but I think instead we'll include 4 copies of Prince Eric. It'll still allow us to banish any character, but he needs to get banished in order for it to do that, which you can actually pair with Glimmer versus Glimmer, so that when you banish him, you actually get to choose 2 characters to banish, which is a pretty cool interaction. That leaves us with 8 more cards to replace here. Unfortunately, I don't see a way around building this deck without Be Prepared, so I want to just include 2 copies of it. That way we can cut down the price. It does tick us up to $65, so this will be more at the top end. So unfortunately, this might be more towards the top end of a budget deck, but I think that's just so vital for clearing out most of the cards that you're going to be going up against. And it really is kind of just a break glass in case of emergency card that you can play. And then a card that I'm actually really excited to play around with, it's going to be the Sheriff of Nottingham that came with Shimmering Skies. This card's going to be 1 ink cheaper for every item that you have on the board. So it's going to interact very well with things like the Vitalospheres, the Popsicles that we have. We're running 17 items right now in the deck, so we should be able to get a lot of them out on the board, getting these Sheriff of Nottinghams out very cheaply, and then hopefully giving him the Medal of Heroes to allow him to quest for 6, 8 on a turn. And that's going to put us at 58 total cards. And then just a card that's really good at getting passive lore in any Sapphire deck. It's going to be the McDuck Manor location, 10 cents a piece. You can throw this in any Sapphire deck to get some early game pressure onto the board. With that 9 willpower, it's going to be a bit of a hassle to get rid of and might buy you some time to continue your ramp, get to those control removal characters that we have in the deck. So in total that brings this deck to $66.70. A little bit over what I wanted to get it down to, but I think even so, you're still going to be able to play a ramp control style and win very quickly, although an obvious upgrade is going to be the Lucky Dime, allowing you to tap it, allowing you to exert it and get the lore for that Sheriff of Nottingham instantly without needing to quest him, or even double up. So if you get him to 6 or 8 lore, you're going to swing double-digit lore totals in 1 turn. So that's definitely a path I would take to upgrading this type of deck. All right, so here is the deck in total. For our budget Ruby Sapphire, you're still going to be able to do things like that early game ramp. You're going to be able to get that item card draw with your Hiram still. And then the main difference is instead of using your Tamatoa to get your items back, you have to rely on Merlin's Carpetbag, which plays into Sheriff of Nottingham's ability, allowing you to get him out on the board very cheaply. And because he does also have support, you can turn any of these other characters into +5 attackers, which is some really good synergy. And then since we cut down the removal with the Be Prepared cuts, you will have to rely more on cards like Scar to remove multiple characters in a single turn if they're exerted. Other than that, you're going to have to use your actions that target specific characters. If you're playing up against the things with Ward, that's where you can switch out your Madame Medusas for your Lady Tremaines. They are a similar cost. Same thing with Glimmer vs. Glimmer. Maybe you can throw in a Bee King Undisputed instead. Same ink cost, and just changes the way that you get rid of a character a little bit differently. All right, and now for our final deck, let's move on to a budget Ruby Amethyst deck to see what we can get it down to. All right, so before we get started with this one, it's going to be $233 before we start cutting out some cards. This could be the cheapest deck that we can get out of the budget tier. So we'll aim for 50, but I am pretty confident we might be able to get that even lower. So there are only 4 cards in this deck that are double digit in price. It's going to be the Queen's Castle, which we have to get rid of. Be Prepared, which I hate to cut all the copies of, as we saw in the last one. Sisu Empowered Sibling, and then 4 copies of Maui. And then just getting rid of those brings us down to $100. I think we do need to cut the Madam Mim Fox. Even though it's only $6, it is raising the cost by almost $30 when we look at the 4 copies. And then get rid of both Be Prepareds, even though I hate to do it. And that there brings us down to $56. We can go even cheaper by getting rid of your Flynn Riders and your Sisus. Bring us down to $31.32. And let's see if we can replace some of that usability of the cards that are already in the deck. An easy way to just recoup some of that card draw you're losing from Queen's Castle would be bump up the copies of the library up to 4. All right, and then since we're losing our main way to get Rush with Maui onto the board and our Madam Mim Fox, I think running 4 copies of the new Cogsworth card is going to be essential. This is just going to allow us to give Rush to something for that 1 cost. We can also choose to play with Madam Mim, the elephant version of Madam Mim. It's a cheaper version of the fox, and it's going to be a little bit more expensive ink-wise than the fox was, but it's a little bit more tanky of a card, and we can still give it rush if we combo it with that Cogsworth, and we still get to keep the bounce identity that Amethyst has. And then we don't have Maui, but Amethyst does have access to Peter Pan Shadowfinder, which is a rush evasive character, and all of our evasive characters gain rush. So we can use 3 copies of that and combo it with a strong evasive character to replace things like the Madam Mim Fox and the Maui. So in order to replace Maui, pretty situational, but I think this new Olaf card, where for every exerted character your opponent has on the field, you can pay 1 less ink to play this character. If our opponent has just 3 characters on their field and exerted, it's going to bring this down to a 6 cost, making him a 6/6 questing for 3 with evasive, 4/6. And if we have either a Cogsworth at our disposal or that Peter Pan in play, it'll get rushed as well to take out one of those characters. We also have the option of including this Hercules Daring Demigod. He is uninkable, so I don't like going up to 4 copies of this, but it would allow us to have another replacement for the Maui. That brings us to 54 cards. Let's see if we can get a couple more inkable cards to really finish out the deck here. So definitely not as good as the Flynn, but we can run with a couple copies of the Maximus for that passive lore per turn. And then the last 3 cards in the deck will be the Sword Release item. It's a new card with Shimmering Skies that I really like this new item because it fills a similar role as the Flynn, where normally you'll be getting +1 lore per turn if you meet the condition. It's not as much as the Flynn because Flynn was giving you 3, but this one also is draining your opponent with lore. So it's technically a 2 lore swing, which coming in at a cheaper cost is something that we can look to include in the deck. So that does it for the Ruby Amethyst budget deck. Coming in at 61 cards, $46.76. This version of the deck definitely has some weaknesses when compared to the version that is competing at the top end of tournaments right now. I think in general, Ruby Amethyst might be the most friendly to get into cost-wise right now, just because there's only certain specific cards that have a lot of value. Definite improvements for this deck would be like bringing back Be Prepareds to have that emergency board wipe. Queen's Castle, obviously, if you can get those onto the board very early and then just focus on your removal every turn to get that passive lore in addition to getting extra card draw. But for a cheaper cost, this is still going to be able to bounce characters. You're going to be able to use your removal. But that does it for this video. Let me know what you guys think about the budget options that we put together. They definitely aren't as flashy or as sound as the top meta contenders, but I thought this was still a pretty interesting way to view Lorcana. Coming at it from a budget conscious, just getting into the game perspective, you can definitely see how reliant we are on some of those early set favorites that are holding a lot of value. Who knows, maybe one day we'll get some version of reprints, although that definitely would kill the hype around the game. I think it also would make the game a lot more approachable for people trying to get in without breaking the bank. I think the best solution is to make the cards a little bit more available, even if they appear different. So maybe if they're like a different version of the card that is just reprinted on a new set, but it has the same ability, same stat line, stuff like that. We'll have to see what Ravensburger ends up doing as they continue to add more and more sets, more and more cards to the game. We've already seen some of the features kind of start to repeat themselves and get upgraded. I wonder if we're going to get to a point where the power curve kind of outweighs some of the effectiveness of those early set heavy hitters that are going for 30-40 bucks on secondary markets. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you guys again for taking the time to watch. Let me know in the comments what you're using as a budget option in Lorcana. I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend, and I'll see you guys in the next video. See ya.